Welcome back to episode 2 of Salon Sundays with Carey. And sorry, we're just checking on our technical capacities here. Last week in episode 1, I played the 10th fantasy of Telemann, Fantasy X. And you might remember it started with a great fugue-like movement, ha-he. And the reason why I chose to start with them is just because I like it, because it's catchy, and also because of the key and because of that, the nature of that first movement from the Telemann, it set up a discussion about the form of a Bach suite so that we can compare them to the Fantasies. And so I was able to compare the ha-he to the prelude of the first Bach suite. And then we went on to talk about the first of the 4 dances in a Baroque dance suite, the Allemande. And I played the first and 6th suite Allemands. Now, Telemann's Fantasy X did not include an Allemande. So you might ask, why start that way? Why not start with one of the Telemann fantasies that did include an Allemande? Well, really, I wanted to make it about that prelude. And frankly, you're going to hear an awful lot more Allemands from Telemann, among other people. Today we're playing Fantasy number 8. And it does begin with an Allemande. Now, an Allemande is supposed to be binary form, A, B, both parts repeated. And frankly, Telemann doesn't always stick to these things. However, in terms of character, in terms of tempo, in terms of the dance, this is clearly an Allemande. And he's marked it Piacevolmente, which means agreeably. So you can imagine, the step and then the lifting. This is a beautiful, agreeable walk in a garden. The second movement of Fantasy number 8 is Spirituoso. It is in 3/4. It is definitely inspired by a Courante. However, even though it is in a binary form, it has no pickup note, which should be required for a Courante. So again, I believe Telemann was creating these fantasies from ideas that fit well together, and trying not to be constrained by the rules of the dance forms. So at any rate, this Spirituoso is a lot of fun, very energetic, and it sets us up for the discussion that we'll have after the Telemann about the Courante. So this fantasy also ends with a Gigue. Now, this is a really strange form of a Gigue. It's well, it is in 2 parts, but it's really more in 3 parts, and it's one of these movements that you will hear as we go along. Telemann decides to end his fantasies with these very short, little clever, funky dances. And so this fantasy is not an exception to that rule. So I'll play all 3 movements, beginning with this opening prelude, which is entitled Piacevolmente, which is an Allemande, and then finally Spirituoso, Courante, and Allegro, a Gigue. Oh, actually, I wanted to say one more thing about this. These pieces were written for a violinist to play, and the cello's, quite a bit bigger than a violin. And violinists can reach, a whole 4th in their hand. So they always have an octave in the space of their hand. So when cellists play violinist literature, we either have to spread out our hand or shift a lot more. I do both. And fortunately, I have a big enough hand that a lot of these passages I can play with a sort of an alternate fingering, but as in the manner that a violinist would. Lots of times cellists will bring up our thumb, and that's a standard procedure. But it's a lot better to keep our hand open. So you might watch for that, especially in the Courante. So that's Fantasy VIII by Telemann. Now, before we start talking about courantes, I wanted to include, something interesting about the repertoire that I'm playing for each episode, but also something personal, a personal story. Last time we did a little physical comedy, and I shared with you a wonderful tennis lesson I had on the Allemandes of Bach. But today, I'd like to introduce you to my cello. This is a cello made in 1922 by Giuseppe Pedrazzini, and its name is Lee. Now, you'll see on the mantle behind me a picture. These are my parents, Lee and Barbara. And I'm fortunate to have two fine instruments to play on. Neither incredibly valuable, but both, really beautiful professional quality instruments. And the story of how they came to me is pretty interesting to most people. My father and mother were born in 1932. I grew up in Granville, Ohio, the youngest of 5 kids, and my father was on the music faculty at Denison University. He was a musicologist and a pianist. He was also the church organist. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, turning pages for my dad, and accidentally falling off the bench onto the bass keys of the organ. But Dad was he was a wonderful musician and quite a good pianist. And I had the opportunity to play with him throughout my high school years and even into college. And we had played 4 of the 5 Beethoven sonatas together. We often would, our family vacations on a beach in North Carolina. And my grandfather and grandmother lived in just outside Chapel Hill in a wonderful retirement community called Carroll Woods. And we would all go down a couple days early, and Dad and I would play a recital nearly every summer for the Carroll Woods residents. So my dad retired in 1995 from Denison, and he moved out to Seattle, Washington. And he enjoyed the first year of his retirement, and then he passed away suddenly in 1996, which was a terrible loss to me. But, as things go, there's a balance between, sorrow and joy. And all of those wonderful memories of playing music with him have really held me up for many years. But as you can imagine, he was as a liberal arts professor and father of 5 children, his retirement account was kind of small. And between taking half of it for my mother and then dividing the rest of it into five parts, even though he had died so early into his retirement, we were left a little bit of money. And as it turns out, I was really ready for another cello and ready to start shopping, but I wasn't emotionally prepared to start shopping. However, that summer, I was giving a recital at Carroll Woods with a hired pianist. My idea was that we would just keep right on rolling along without Dad. We would keep the tradition going. But it was early July, and the recital was in the 3rd week in July, and I was not prepared. I was visiting Professor Dixon in San Francisco, and so I went to find an instrument just to borrow for a week so that I could prepare for this recital while I was visiting Dixon. And so we went to a couple different violin shops, but we ended up in Union Square at the Piacevolente violin shop. It was about on the 13th story, right on Union Square. And we walked in, and there were instruments everywhere, and big windows, but they were all open. The windows were open, and I played tons and tons of instruments. And this was the only one that I really felt was something I would want to go take home and play for a week. I was quite surprised by the price. I really thought it was not nearly in the league, worth as much as he was asking. But I asked him to take it home on approval, and I started practicing. And it got better. It started to even out. And on about the third day, the G string opened up, and it really started resonating. But it still just wasn't anything great. But about the fourth day, it was in the afternoon. I was practicing quite a lot. And Dixon was in the bedroom taking a nap. And something happened, and the cello just woke up, and the C string came and dropped in, and all of a sudden, the place was just filled with resonance, and Dixon got out of bed, and I saw him come to the doorway and peek around the corner with this astonished look on his face. And he said, "What happened?" Well, as it turns out, if you have a cello that hasn't been played for 30 years and it's been sitting in San Francisco on the 13th floor with the windows open, it might take a little while to come to itself. So, to make a long story short, I took the cello with me, flew back to Ohio, drove to North Carolina, played the recital, and then in August played it in the Clap Recital Hall against Charles Wentz Galliano cello, and decided to buy it. And so its name is Lee, and it's quite a beautiful cello. It's a beautiful back and top, and it was a wonderful cello for me as principal cellist of the Cedar Rapids Symphony, because it's instruments resonate in different ways, and this is a very back-sounding cello. So if you're expecting 10 cellos and 6 or 8 basses to follow you, it's better if they can hear you. So the fact that the projection does go backwards as well as forwards was a lot of assistance. So, but it was an orchestral cello. It is an orchestral cello. It's more modern, but at any rate, I'll tell you more about my other cello and the story of how I got them next time. But my dad passed away, when I was 30 years old. And I miss him, but I have Lee, and so that's the silver lining. So, last time we talked about Allemandes, the walking dance. Today, the Courante, the running dance. And I'll begin with the G major Courante, which is just like the G major Allemande, it's young and it's invigorated, and it's a joy to play and a joy to teach. very interesting about these dance pieces. It's a German Allemande and a French Courante and a Spanish sarabande and an English Gigue, right? But really, there are different kinds of Allemandes and there are different kinds of Courantes. And basically, there are two kinds, a slow kind and a fast kind. This is a fast kind. This is an Italian Courante. Now, of course, we use the French spelling, and you can never tell by the spelling, because the spelling just means, you know, the country in which it was published, or the choice the composer made, most times Italian. It's quite difficult. But I think we can tell the difference between a fast one and a slow one. Now, there are different kinds of slow courantes, and we'll get to hear some really nice, slower French courantes later. But today, I thought I would share with you the Courante from the Fifth Suite of J.S. Bach. Now, the Fifth Suite is exceptional for one reason, that it was written for a cello that was tuned differently. The A string comes down to G, so instead of that's the tuning. So you can make, you know, kind of nice sounds like that. And it's difficult to play, and it's hard on the instrument to take it back and forth. I won't be tuning down in this concert. But at any rate, the Fifth Suite is also different because its Gigue is a French Gigue. It's a little different, and you'll get to hear that. Its Courante is a French Courante. And instead of just having a prelude, it actually has a prelude and fugue, and the prelude is a kind of a French overture. So in a French Courante, in lots of cases, we tend to double dot things to affect the rhythm so that the little notes are a little littler and the long notes are a little longer. That's not the case with the Fifth Suite Courante, but it is the case in the prelude of the Fifth Suite and in the Allemande a little bit, definitely in the Gigue. But at any rate, it's definitely, of the 6 suites of Bach, it's definitely the one that has a French flavor. So at any rate, this Courante, instead of being in 3/4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the beat being primarily 1, 1. This is in 3/2. It's in a bigger meter. It's a little slower, and one of the things about French Courantes is that they like to play with the phrasing, play with the rhythm, so there can be ambiguity and 2 against 3 and strange things. The whole piece is basically in 3, but the last measure each time, the last measure of each of the 2 sections is in 2. So it's a little weird. But at any rate, this is the Fifth Suite in C minor, Courante. So finally, today, I'm going to play the D major, the sixth suite Courante. And as you remember with the Allemands from the first and sixth suite, you know, Bach really grew up for the sixth suite. And, you know, in addition to the extended range from having a fifth string, this is really quite a much bigger form. And it's notier, and it uses quite a bit of register. But I think, well, I think you'll enjoy it. And I think you'll enjoy it in much the same way you enjoyed the first suite, Courante. Yeah, so at any rate, thank you for joining us tonight. This is the sixth suite Courante of Bach. Thank you all. Next week, episode 3, you'll get to meet my other cello, Barbara, who's, if Lee is turning 100 years old in 2022, Barbara is turning at least 400. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you. I stand